The wheelchair was empty. That's what hit me first as I rounded the corner at 5:47 a.m., my breath forming clouds in the October air. For 8 months, Henry had been right there, same spot, same time, struggling with that ancient wheelchair on the steep hill that led to Maple Ridge Estate. But this morning, the wheelchair sat abandoned, tilted at an odd angle against the lamppost. And there was blood on the armrest. Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing amazing this morning, or whenever you're watching this. I know some of you tune in from all over the world, so drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you're new here and you love stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. My name's Olivia Carter, and what I'm about to tell you changed everything. Everything I thought I knew about kindness, about the people we help, about the dangerous games that wealthy families play when billions are on the line. Because that morning when I found Henry's empty wheelchair, I thought I was looking at a tragedy. I had no idea I was staring at the beginning of a war. The blood was still wet. My hands shook as I crouched down, my nurse's training kicking in even though I was officially off duty. 3 dark drops on the worn leather armrest, 1 smeared across the metal wheel. Fresh. Maybe 10 minutes old. Henry? My voice cracked in the dawn silence. Henry, where are you? The hill stretched up toward the estate gates, empty except for the morning joggers who never bothered to notice an old man in a wheelchair. The same people who walked past him every single day like he was invisible. But I'd seen Henry. For 8 months, I'd stopped my rushed morning routine to help push him up this impossible slope, listening to his quiet stories about his late wife, buying him coffee when I barely had money for my own. My phone buzzed. Ben, my 9-year-old, texting from our apartment 3 blocks away, Mom, where are you? Breakfast? I typed back with trembling fingers, be home in 10. Start your cereal. But I couldn't leave. Not when Henry might be hurt. Not when. Ma'am? A voice behind me made me spin around. A security guard from the estate, crisp uniform, suspicious eyes. You need to move along. There's been an accident, I said, pointing at the wheelchair. Henry Walker, the elderly man who comes here every morning, his chair is here but he's gone. There's blood. The guard's expression didn't change. I don't know any Henry Walker. You have to know him. He's been coming here for months. Every morning, same time. About 70, gray hair, always wearing that blue cardigan. Ma'am. The guard stepped closer, and I caught the gleam of something metallic on his belt. You need to leave. Now. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. Because 3 months ago, this same guard had helped me call an ambulance when Henry had a dizzy spell. He'd known Henry's name then. He'd been concerned, helpful, almost kind. Now he was looking at me like I was the threat. My phone rang. Unknown number. Olivia Carter? Yes? This is Margaret Davidson from Whitmore, Davidson and Associates. We represent the Maple Ridge Estate. You need to come to the main house immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm sorry, who is this? How did you get my number? Ms. Carter, you've been providing assistance to one of our residents. We need to speak with you regarding Mr. Henry Walker. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Is he okay? Is Henry hurt? Please come to the main house. Use the service entrance. Tell security that Margaret Davidson is expecting you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then at the empty wheelchair, then at the security guard who was now speaking rapidly into his radio. Words I couldn't make out, but his tone was urgent. Almost panicked. My phone buzzed again. Ben, Mom? Are you okay? I wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. For 8 months, I'd thought I was helping a lonely old man who'd been forgotten by the world. I'd thought I understood what kindness looked like, what it cost, what it was worth. I was about to learn that everything I thought I knew about Henry Walker was a lie. And the truth was going to put both me and my son in more danger than I could have ever imagined. Because when wealthy families have secrets worth killing for, the people who get close to those secrets don't just disappear. They become targets. I ran the 3 blocks home like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. By the time I burst through our apartment door, Ben was sitting at our tiny kitchen table, still in his Spider-Man pajamas, methodically eating dry cereal because we'd run out of milk 2 days ago. He looked up with those serious brown eyes that made him seem older than 9, and I felt that familiar stab of guilt that had been my constant companion since his father walked out 4 years ago. Mom, you're shaking. I was. My hands, my voice, everything. I forced a smile and ruffled his messy hair. Just cold, baby. You ready for school? Ben studied my face with the intensity of a child who'd learned too young to read his mother's moods, to sense when the adults in his world were pretending everything was fine. You look scared. God, I loved this kid. And I hated that he had to be so perceptive, so careful, so worried about me when he should be worried about normal 9-year-old things like homework and whether Tommy Rodriguez would sit with him at lunch. I'm not scared, I lied, kneeling down to tie his shoes. I just got a call about work. I might have to go to the big house today instead of the service buildings. The fancy one where all the rich people live. That's the one. Ben's eyes lit up. Maybe they'll give you a better job. Maybe we can get a bigger apartment. My heart clenched. This was Ben's dream, not toys or games or the latest video console, but a bigger apartment. Maybe one with 2 bedrooms so he wouldn't have to sleep on the pull-out couch. Maybe one where the heat worked consistently and the neighbors didn't fight at 2 a.m. and the walls weren't thin enough that he could hear me crying in the bathroom some nights when the bills piled up too high. Maybe, I whispered, even though I knew that whatever was waiting for me at that mansion, it wasn't a promotion. 20 minutes later, I was walking Ben to Riverside Elementary, the same route we took every morning, past the corner market where Mr. Patel always waved, past the bus stop where the commuters ignored the homeless veteran with the cardboard sign, past the chain-link fence that separated our neighborhood from the manicured lawns of Maple Ridge. Mom? Ben slipped his hand into mine. The man you help in the morning, Mr. Henry? Is he okay? I stopped walking. Why do you ask that? You just seem worried about him. You always tell me stories about him when you get home from helping him. You said he reminds you of Grandpa Joe. My dad. Who'd died when Ben was 4, who'd been the kindest man I'd ever known, who'd taught me that helping people wasn't about what you got back, it was about what kind of person you chose to be when no one was watching. That's why I'd started helping Henry. Not because I had extra time or energy or money. God knows I had none of those things. But because 8 months ago, I'd seen him struggling on that hill, completely alone, and something in his eyes reminded me of my father in those last weeks before the cancer took him. That look of someone who'd been forgotten by the world. Mr. Henry's fine, I said, hoping it was true. I'll see you tonight, okay? Ms. Rodriguez is picking you up after school. Ben hugged me tight, the way he always did, like he was trying to give me strength for whatever the day would throw at us. And maybe he was. This kid had been my anchor through everything. The divorce, the financial struggles, the nights when I worked 3 different jobs just to keep us afloat. Being a single mom in a place like Maple Ridge wasn't easy. The wealthy families who lived in the estate needed people like me, housekeepers, groundskeepers, maintenance workers, but they wanted us invisible. Present when they needed us, gone when they didn't. They paid decent wages, better than anywhere else in town, but it came with a price. You learn to keep your head down, your mouth shut, your opinions to yourself. I'd been working the estate for 2 years, mostly in the service buildings, the guest houses, the pool house, the gardener's quarters. I cleaned, I organized, I made sure everything was perfect for people who had more money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes. And I told myself it was worth it because every paycheck meant Ben could stay in a decent school, could have clothes that fit, could have a mother who wasn't constantly panicked about rent. But this morning, walking toward those imposing iron gates with their security cameras and their armed guards, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. Margaret Davidson had said to use the service entrance. That was on the east side of the property, near the kitchen loading docks where the staff parking was located. But as I approached, I couldn't stop thinking about Henry's empty wheelchair, about the blood on the armrest, about the guard who'd suddenly pretended not to know him. What if Henry was inside that mansion right now? What if he was hurt, or worse? What if the family I'd been working for all this time had something to do with his disappearance? The service entrance was a world away from the grand front doors where the wealthy visitors arrived. No marble columns, no gold-trimmed windows. Just a plain metal door marked, staff only, and a security checkpoint that looked more like airport screening than anything I'd ever seen at a private residence. Olivia Carter, I told the guard, trying to keep my voice steady. Margaret Davidson is expecting me. He checked his list, spoke into his radio, then handed me a visitor's badge that felt heavier than it should have. Follow the yellow line to the main house. Don't deviate from the path. As I walked along that yellow line, past gardens that cost more than my annual salary and fountains that belonged in European palaces, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not just by the security cameras mounted every 50 feet, but by something else. Someone else. And with every step closer to that mansion, one thought kept echoing in my mind. 8 months of helping Henry. 8 months of thinking I was just being kind to a lonely old man. What if Henry Walker wasn't who I thought he was? What if nothing about the last 8 months had been real? The main house was even more intimidating from the inside. A butler in a crisp black suit led me through hallways lined with oil paintings worth more than my entire neighborhood, past rooms filled with furniture that belonged in museums. My sneakers squeaked against marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead, and I found myself walking on my tiptoes, trying to make less noise, trying to take up less space. Ms. Davidson will see you in the East Wing, the butler said without looking at me. This way. We passed a sitting room where I glimpsed two women in designer clothes speaking in hushed, angry tones. One of them looked up as we walked by, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. She was maybe 40, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of jewelry that screamed old money. Her expression made it clear that she knew exactly who I was, and that I wasn't welcome. My palms were sweating by the time we reached the East Wing. The butler knocked on a set of heavy wooden doors, waited for a response, then gestured for me to enter. "Ms. Carter," said a woman behind an imposing desk. Margaret Davidson was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about rent money. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Is Henry okay?" I blurted out before she could say anything else. "I found his wheelchair this morning with blood on it, and the security guard acted like he didn't know who I was talking about. Please, sit down." I remained standing. "Where is he?" Margaret Davidson studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she was cataloging everything about me, my off-brand jeans, my worn sneakers, the way my voice shook when I was scared. "Ms. Carter, how long have you been helping Mr. Walker?" 8 months. Every morning before work. "Is he hurt? And in that time, what did Mr. Walker tell you about himself?" The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? About his family. His background. His living situation. I shifted uncomfortably. He didn't talk about himself much. He mentioned his late wife sometimes. He said he was lonely. He never really said where he lived or. I trailed off, suddenly realizing how little I actually knew about the man I'd been helping for 8 months. "Ms. Carter, I need to ask you to come with me. There's someone who wants to speak with you." "I don't understand. Who wants to speak with me? Where's Henry?" But Margaret was already moving toward another set of doors at the far end of the office. "This way, please." My heart was hammering as I followed her down another hallway, this one even more opulent than the last. We stopped in front of double doors made of some kind of dark wood that probably cost more than my car. "Before we go in," Margaret said, her hand on the door handle, "I need you to understand that what you're about to see may come as a shock. Mr. Walker specifically requested that you be brought here, but his family, they have concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "They believe you may have been taking advantage of an elderly man's generosity." Heat flooded my face. "That's ridiculous. I never asked Henry for anything. I bought him coffee with my own money. I helped him because he reminded me of my father." Something flickered in Margaret's expression. Almost like approval. "That's exactly what he said you'd say." Before I could ask what that meant, she opened the doors. The room beyond was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Golden wallpaper, paintings in elaborate frames, furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. Medical equipment hummed quietly in one corner, oxygen tanks, monitors, a hospital bed. And there, in the center of it all, sat Henry Walker. But he wasn't in his wheelchair. He was sitting upright in a leather chair that probably cost more than my annual salary, wearing an expensive sweater instead of his usual threadbare cardigan. His back was straight, his posture commanding. He looked different. Stronger. Like the helpless old man I'd been pushing up that hill had been some kind of costume he'd been wearing. Around him stood 4 people I didn't recognize, 3 men and a woman, all impeccably dressed, all staring at me with expressions that ranged from hostile to furious. "Olivia," Henry said, and his voice was different too. Not the weak, tremulous tone I was used to, but clear and authoritative. "Thank you for coming." I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make sense. This couldn't be the same man. The Henry the First knew could barely push himself up that hill. He struggled to open coffee cups. He moved like every step caused him pain. "I don't understand," I finally managed to whisper. "My name is Henry Montgomery Walker," he said, meeting my eyes. "And I own this estate." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward a step. "You own?" "Everything. The mansion, the grounds, the businesses that fund it all. Worth approximately $2.3 billion. One of the men around him, tall, dark-haired, maybe 45, stepped forward. "Father, this is ridiculous. We don't know anything about this woman. For all we know, she's been manipulating you from the beginning." "Manipulating?" I found my voice, and it came out stronger than I felt. "I never even knew his last name." The woman in the group laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How convenient." Henry raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "Olivia has been helping me for 8 months without knowing who I was or what I was worth. She bought me coffee when she clearly couldn't afford to spare the money. She listened to my stories. She treated me like a human being when my own family." He looked at the four people around him with something that might have been disappointment or disgust. When my own family decided I was too much trouble to deal with. That's not fair, the dark-haired man said. After your accident, we thought it would be better if you had professional care. You thought it would be better if I was out of sight and out of mind, Henry cut him off. Just like you've been trying to have me declared incompetent so you can take control of the estate. My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. The Henry I knew was gentle, vulnerable, alone. Not a billionaire. Not someone with a family who wanted to have him declared incompetent. Olivia, Henry said, his voice gentler now. I need to ask something of you. Something that may put you in danger. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Everyone was staring at me, Henry with something that looked like hope, the others with barely contained rage. I don't understand what's happening, I said. My children want me gone. They've been trying to have me removed as head of the estate for months. But I've been watching them, learning what they're capable of. And I've realized that the only person in my life who has shown me genuine kindness, who has no ulterior motive, is you. One of the men scoffed. This is insane. She's nobody. She's the person I'm naming as my personal advocate, Henry said quietly. The room exploded. Absolutely not, the woman shouted. Father, you can't be serious, the dark-haired man stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. She doesn't even know what that means, another man added. But all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears as the implications hit me. Henry Walker, billionaire Henry Walker, wanted me to be involved in whatever war was happening in his family. Me. A single mother who cleaned houses for a living. Me. Someone who could barely afford to buy him coffee. And suddenly, I understood why everyone in this room was looking at me like I was the enemy. Because if Henry meant what I thought he meant, I'd just become the only thing standing between them and $2.3 billion. Personal advocate? I finally found my voice. What does that even mean? Henry's expression was patient, almost grandfatherly, but his children looked like they wanted to strangle me with their bare hands. It means, said the dark-haired man through gritted teeth, that you would have decision-making power over our father's medical care, his living arrangements, his daily schedule. It means, Henry interrupted calmly, that someone I trust would ensure that my wishes are respected, rather than being overridden by people who see me as an inconvenience. The blonde woman, who I was starting to realize must be his daughter, stepped forward. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor like gunshots. This is absurd, father. You barely know this woman. Victoria, Henry said, and there was steel in his voice now. I've known Olivia for 8 months. In that time, she has shown me more genuine care than I've received from my own children in the past 2 years. Victoria's face flushed red. Because we were respecting your privacy. Because we were giving you space to recover from your accident. You were hoping I'd die quietly and save you the trouble of having me committed. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. I looked around the room at these beautifully dressed, perfectly polished people, and I could see it in their faces. Henry wasn't wrong. This is exactly why we're concerned about your judgment, said one of the other men, younger than the dark-haired one, maybe mid-30s. You're being paranoid, father. We love you. We want what's best for you. What's best for me, James, or what's best for your trust fund? James's jaw tightened. That's unfair. Is it? Henry turned to me. Olivia, in the 8 months you've known me, have I ever seemed mentally unstable to you? I thought about our morning conversations, the way Henry remembered details about my life, asked thoughtful questions about Ben, gave gentle advice when I was struggling. No, I said quietly. You've always seemed sharp. Aware. She's not qualified to make that assessment, Victoria snapped. What are her credentials? Her education? Her background? The dismissal in her tone made something hot flare in my chest. I'd heard that tone before, from doctors who assumed I was stupid because I was a single mom, from teachers who looked down on us because we lived in the wrong neighborhood, from people who thought that not having money meant not having worth. My credentials, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, are that I treated your father like a human being when he was alone and forgotten. I don't need a degree to know the difference between someone who's confused and someone who's being ignored. Victoria's eyes narrowed. How much? How much what? How much money did he promise you for this little performance? What's your angle here? I don't have an angle. The words came out louder than I intended. I don't want anything from your father. I was helping him because it was the right thing to do. Nobody helps strangers for 8 months without wanting something in return, the third man said. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of cold eyes that reminded me of sharks. Everyone has a price. Well, I guess you don't know everyone, I shot back. Henry was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't read. Almost like he was testing something, seeing how I'd react under pressure. Olivia, Margaret Davidson spoke up from where she'd been standing quietly by the door. Perhaps you'd like some time to consider Mr. Walker's offer? She doesn't need time, Victoria said sharply. She needs to leave. Now. Actually, Henry said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making billion-dollar decisions, what Olivia needs is protection. The room went dead silent. Protection from what? I asked, though I was starting to have a sinking feeling that I already knew. My children are not accustomed to having their plans thwarted, Henry said quietly. And you, my dear, have just become a very large obstacle to what they want. James laughed, but it sounded forced. Are you threatening us, Father? Or are you trying to scare this poor woman into? I'm stating facts. Henry's gaze swept over his children, and I saw something in their faces shift. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. 2 years ago, I had an accident. A fall down the stairs in my own home. Since then, my children have been, remarkably eager to take over my responsibilities. We were helping you. Victoria protested. You were isolating me. Moving me to the guest wing, limiting my access to my own business, telling my doctors and lawyers that I was confused and declining rapidly. Henry's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. The only reason I was able to maintain any independence at all was because I let you think your plan was working while I figured out who I could trust. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Ben, texting from school. The thought of my son made my chest tight with panic. What had I walked into? What kind of danger was Henry talking about? I need to ask you all something, I said, looking around the room. If Henry, Mr. Walker, if he really is as confused and declining as you claim, how exactly do you explain the fact that he's been successfully hiding his identity from me for 8 months? How do you explain that he had the mental capacity to observe my character, make judgments about my trustworthiness, and plan this entire scenario? The silence stretched out for a long moment. She has a point, Margaret said quietly. Victoria rounded on her. Don't you start. We're paying your firm to represent this family's interests, not to validate Father's delusions. Actually, Margaret said, her tone carefully professional, your father is paying my firm. And his instructions have been very clear and very lucid. I watched Victoria's face cycle through anger, frustration, and something that looked like genuine fear. These people weren't just greedy. They were desperate. Olivia, Henry said gently, I understand this is overwhelming. But I need you to know, if you agree to help me, there will be consequences. My children will not take this lying down. What kind of consequences? It was James who answered, his voice low and threatening. The kind that happen when people who don't belong in our world try to insert themselves into family business worth billions of dollars. Is that a threat? I asked. It's a reality check, the silver-haired man said. You have a son, don't you, Ms. Carter? 9 years old? Attends Riverside Elementary? My blood turned to ice. How do you know about Ben? We know everything about you. Your address, your employment history, your financial situation. Your ex-husband who hasn't paid child support in 2 years. Your mother who died when you were 19. Your father who died of cancer 3 years ago. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. We know that you're one missed paycheck away from losing your apartment. Richard, that's enough, Henry said sharply. But Richard wasn't done. We know that your son walks to school alone every morning because you can't afford before-school care. We know his route, his schedule, his favorite playground. Terror flooded through me so fast I thought I might pass out. You stay away from my son. That's entirely up to you, Victoria said sweetly. Make the right choice, and Ben will continue to have a normal, safe childhood. Make the wrong choice. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I looked at Henry, and I could see the anguish in his eyes. He'd wanted to protect me, but he'd also known this would happen. He'd known his own children were capable of threatening a 9-year-old boy. I need time to think, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, Henry said. But Olivia, whatever you decide, please remember that some fights are worth having. Even when they're dangerous. As I walked out of that golden room with my hands shaking and my mind racing, I realized that everything had changed. My quiet life, my simple routine, my modest dreams for Ben's future, all of it was now at the mercy of people who saw us as disposable. But walking past those oil paintings and crystal chandeliers, I also realized something else. I was angry. These people had everything, money, power, privilege beyond imagination, and they were using it to threaten a single mother and her child because they couldn't stand the thought of their father choosing kindness over blood. Maybe Henry was right. Maybe some fights were worth having. Even the dangerous ones. Personal advocate? I finally found my voice. What does that even mean? Henry's expression was patient, almost grandfatherly, but his children looked like they wanted to strangle me with their bare hands. It means, said the dark-haired man through gritted teeth, that you would have decision-making power over our father's medical care, his living arrangements, his daily schedule. It means, Henry interrupted calmly, that someone I trust would ensure that my wishes are respected, rather than being overridden by people who see me as an inconvenience. The blonde woman, who I was starting to realize must be his daughter, stepped forward. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor like gunshots. This is absurd, father. You barely know this woman. Victoria, Henry said, and there was steel in his voice now. I've known Olivia for 8 months. In that time, she has shown me more genuine care than I've received from my own children in the past 2 years. Victoria's face flushed red. Because we were respecting your privacy. Because we were giving you space to recover from your accident. You were hoping I'd die quietly and save you the trouble of having me committed. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. I looked around the room at these beautifully dressed, perfectly polished people, and I could see it in their faces. Henry wasn't wrong. This is exactly why we're concerned about your judgment, said one of the other men, younger than the dark-haired one, maybe mid-30s. You're being paranoid, father. We love you. We want what's best for you. What's best for me, James, or what's best for your trust fund? James's jaw tightened. That's unfair. Is it? Henry turned to me. Olivia, in the 8 months you've known me, have I ever seemed mentally unstable to you? I thought about our morning conversations, the way Henry remembered details about my life, asked thoughtful questions about Ben, gave gentle advice when I was struggling. No, I said quietly. You've always seemed sharp. Aware. She's not qualified to make that assessment, Victoria snapped. What are her credentials? Her education? Her background? The dismissal in her tone made something hot flare in my chest. I'd heard that tone before, from doctors who assumed I was stupid because I was a single mom, from teachers who looked down on us because we lived in the wrong neighborhood, from people who thought that not having money meant not having worth. My credentials, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, are that I treated your father like a human being when he was alone and forgotten. I don't need a degree to know the difference between someone who's confused and someone who's being ignored. Victoria's eyes narrowed. How much? How much what? How much money did he promise you for this little performance? What's your angle here? I don't have an angle. The words came out louder than I intended. I don't want anything from your father. I was helping him because it was the right thing to do. Nobody helps strangers for 8 months without wanting something in return, the third man said. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of cold eyes that reminded me of sharks. Everyone has a price. Well, I guess you don't know everyone, I shot back. Henry was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't read. Almost like he was testing something, seeing how I'd react under pressure. Olivia, Margaret Davidson spoke up from where she'd been standing quietly by the door. Perhaps you'd like some time to consider Mr. Walker's offer? She doesn't need time, Victoria said sharply. She needs to leave. Now. Actually, Henry said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making billion-dollar decisions, what Olivia needs is protection. The room went dead silent. Protection from what? I asked, though I was starting to have a sinking feeling that I already knew. My children are not accustomed to having their plans thwarted, Henry said quietly. And you, my dear, have just become a very large obstacle to what they want. James laughed, but it sounded forced. Are you threatening us, father? Or are you trying to scare this poor woman into? I'm stating facts. Henry's gaze swept over his children, and I saw something in their faces shift. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. 2 years ago, I had an accident. A fall down the stairs in my own home. Since then, my children have been, remarkably eager to take over my responsibilities. We were helping you. Victoria protested. You were isolating me. Moving me to the guest wing, limiting my access to my own business, telling my doctors and lawyers that I was confused and declining rapidly. Henry's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. The only reason I was able to maintain any independence at all was because I let you think your plan was working while I figured out who I could trust. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Ben, texting from school. The thought of my son made my chest tight with panic. What had I walked into? What kind of danger was Henry talking about? I need to ask you all something, I said, looking around the room. If Henry, Mr. Walker, if he really is as confused and declining as you claim, how exactly do you explain the fact that he's been successfully hiding his identity from me for 8 months? How do you explain that he had the mental capacity to observe my character, make judgments about my trustworthiness, and plan this entire scenario? The silence stretched out for a long moment. She has a point, Margaret said quietly. Victoria rounded on her. Don't you start. We're paying your firm to represent this family's interests, not to validate father's delusions. Actually, Margaret said, her tone carefully professional, your father is paying my firm. And his instructions have been very clear and very lucid. I watched Victoria's face cycle through anger, frustration, and something that looked like genuine fear. These people weren't just greedy. They were desperate. Olivia, Henry said gently, I understand this is overwhelming. But I need you to know, if you agree to help me, there will be consequences. My children will not take this lying down. What kind of consequences? It was James who answered, his voice low and threatening. The kind that happen when people who don't belong in our world try to insert themselves into family business worth billions of dollars. Is that a threat? I asked. It's a reality check, the silver-haired man said. You have a son, don't you, Ms. Carter? 9 years old? Attends Riverside Elementary? My blood turned to ice. How do you know about Ben? We know everything about you. Your address, your employment history, your financial situation. Your ex-husband who hasn't paid child support in 2 years. Your mother who died when you were 19. Your father who died of cancer 3 years ago. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. We know that you're one missed paycheck away from losing your apartment. Richard, that's enough, Henry said sharply. But Richard wasn't done. We know that your son walks to school alone every morning because you can't afford before-school care. We know his route, his schedule, his favorite playground. Terror flooded through me so fast I thought I might pass out. You stay away from my son. That's entirely up to you, Victoria said sweetly. Make the right choice, and Ben will continue to have a normal, safe childhood. Make the wrong choice. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I looked at Henry, and I could see the anguish in his eyes. He'd wanted to protect me, but he'd also known this would happen. He'd known his own children were capable of threatening a 9-year-old boy. I need time to think, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, Henry said. But Olivia, whatever you decide, please remember that some fights are worth having. Even when they're dangerous. As I walked out of that golden room with my hands shaking and my mind racing, I realized that everything had changed. My quiet life, my simple routine, my modest dreams for Ben's future, all of it was now at the mercy of people who saw us as disposable. But walking past those oil paintings and crystal chandeliers, I also realized something else. I was angry. These people had everything, money, power, privilege beyond imagination, and they were using it to threaten a single mother and her child because they couldn't stand the thought of their father choosing kindness over blood. Maybe Henry was right. Maybe some fights were worth having. Even the dangerous ones. I made it exactly 3 blocks from the mansion before I had to pull over and throw up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda. I kept hearing Richard's voice, we know that your son walks to school alone every morning. The casual way he'd said it, like he was discussing the weather instead of threatening a child. My phone rang. Margaret Davidson. Olivia? Are you all right? No, I'm not all right, I said, my voice raw. Your clients just threatened my 9-year-old son. I know. And I'm sorry. That's actually why I'm calling. She paused. Can you meet me somewhere private? There are things about the Walker family that you need to know. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Margaret in a small coffee shop downtown, my hands wrapped around a mug I couldn't seem to stop shaking. Margaret looked different outside the mansion, younger, more human, less like a corporate shark in expensive clothing. How long have you worked for the family? I asked. Technically? 3 years. But I've only been working for Henry for the past 6 months. I frowned. What does that mean? Margaret glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned forward. It means that for the first 2.5 years, I was hired by Victoria, James, and Richard to help them gain control of the estate. I was supposed to be gathering evidence of Henry's mental decline, documenting incidents that would support a competency hearing. My stomach dropped. And the more time I spent reviewing Henry's medical records, his business decisions, his personal correspondence, the more I realized that there was nothing wrong with his mental capacity. In fact, he was sharper than any of them. So why were they so convinced he was declining? Margaret's expression darkened. Because they needed him to be declining. Because 2 years ago, Henry changed his will. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash. Changed it how? Originally, the estate was to be divided equally among his 3 children upon his death. Standard inheritance structure for a family of that wealth. But 2 years ago, right around the time of his accident, Henry added a clause that would donate 90% of his fortune to charitable foundations if he died under suspicious circumstances or if he was declared incompetent against his own wishes. I set my mug down with a clatter. He suspected something. He more than suspected something. Margaret reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Olivia, Henry's accident wasn't an accident. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? The night Henry fell down those stairs, he wasn't alone in the house. Victoria was there. She'd come for what she claimed was a routine visit, but security cameras show her leaving through a side entrance at 2:47 a.m., 40 minutes after Henry's fall was reported. My mouth went dry. Are you saying she pushed him? I'm saying the timing is suspicious. I'm saying that Henry's injuries were consistent with being struck from behind before falling. And I'm saying that in the weeks leading up to his accident, Henry had been asking questions about some unusual financial transactions in the family trust. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm, too exposed. What kind of transactions? Margaret opened the folder and showed me a series of documents covered in numbers and legal language that made my head spin. James has been embezzling from the estate for almost 5 years. Not small amounts, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts, fake consulting fees, fraudulent investment schemes. And Henry found out. Henry was starting to find out. That's why Victoria visited him that night. That's why, 3 days later when he was released from the hospital with a traumatic brain injury and temporary paralysis, they were so quick to suggest that he needed specialized care away from the main house. I felt sick again. They tried to kill him. They tried to kill him, Margaret confirmed. And when that didn't work, they decided to have him declared incompetent so they could take control of his assets and cover up the embezzlement. But Henry figured it out. Henry figured it out. That's why he started his field research. He needed to know who he could trust. He needed to understand exactly how far his children were willing to go. And he needed someone on the outside, someone with no connection to the family, no reason to lie to him or manipulate him. I thought about all those mornings, all those conversations. Henry listening to my stories about Ben, asking gentle questions about my dreams, my fears, my values. He hadn't just been passing time. He'd been interviewing me. How long has he known? I asked. About what I was like, I mean. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Olivia, Henry has had private investigators watching you for 6 months. Not to invade your privacy, she added quickly when she saw my expression, but to verify what he was seeing. He needed to be absolutely certain that your kindness was genuine. And their report was unanimous. You are exactly who you appear to be, a woman who works 3 jobs to support her son, who gives her last $5 to buy coffee for a stranger, who has never asked for anything in return for her help. You are, according to their assessment, the most genuinely selfless person any of them had encountered in a professional capacity. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So he picked me because I'm a sucker for hard luck stories. He picked you because you're incorruptible. Because in a family where everyone has a price, you're the only person who doesn't. My phone buzzed. A text from Ben's school. Ben wasn't picked up for after-school care. Please call immediately. Terror shot through me like ice water. Oh God. Oh God, no. I was already dialing Maria Rodriguez's number, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right numbers. Maria? Did you pick up Ben? Olivia? I thought you said you'd changed the pickup arrangements. A man came to get him about an hour ago. He said you'd sent him because of a family emergency. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the table. Margaret caught it, spoke rapidly to Maria, then hung up and immediately dialed another number. This is Margaret Davidson. I need to speak with Henry Walker immediately. It's an emergency. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. They had Ben. These people who had tried to murder their own father, who had threatened my child to my face, who saw human beings as obstacles to be removed, they had my son. Olivia. Margaret grabbed my hands. Look at me. Henry has security resources that go far beyond what his children have access to. We're going to find Ben. How can you be sure? Because Henry anticipated this. Because for the past month, he's had protective surveillance on both you and Ben. His people were already tracking whoever took your son before I even made the call. My phone rang. Unknown number. Answer it, Margaret said. But stay calm. Olivia? It was Victoria's voice, smooth and controlled. I believe we have something that belongs to you. Where is my son? My voice came out as a growl. Ben is perfectly safe. He's playing video games and eating pizza. He thinks he's at a friend's house. And he can stay safe, as long as you make the right decision about my father's ridiculous proposal. If you hurt him, we're not going to hurt him, Victoria said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We're business people, not monsters. We just need you to understand that this situation is bigger than you realize. Walk away from my father's offer, go back to your normal life, and Ben will be home in time for dinner. And if I don't walk away? Then Ben's safety becomes negotiable. The line went dead. I looked at Margaret, whose expression was grim but determined. They have my son. Not for long, she said, and there was something in her voice that reminded me of Henry, that quiet authority, that absolute confidence. Olivia, I need you to understand something. Henry didn't just choose you as his advocate. He chose you as his weapon. What does that mean? It means that everything you've learned today, about the attempted murder, about the embezzlement, about their threats against you and Ben, all of it is going to be used to destroy them. But only if you're willing to fight. I thought about Ben, probably confused and scared, being told lies by people who saw him as leverage in their billion-dollar game. I thought about Henry, who had survived his own children trying to kill him and had spent months carefully building a case against them. I thought about every morning I'd spent helping someone who needed it, never knowing that kindness would lead to this moment. What do you need me to do? Margaret smiled, and for the first time since I'd walked into that mansion, I felt like maybe we had a chance. Help us put them in prison where they belong. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. Margaret had taken me to what she called a safe house, a nondescript office building downtown where Henry apparently kept a secondary headquarters. The room was filled with monitors, computers, and 2 men in dark suits who looked like they belonged in a spy movie rather than helping a cleaning lady find her kidnapped son. We've traced the vehicle that picked up Ben, one of them reported to Margaret. Black sedan, registered to a shell company owned by James Walker. They're moving him every hour to avoid being tracked. Every hour. That meant Ben was being driven around the city like cargo, probably terrified, probably wondering why I wasn't coming to get him. My hands shook as I tried to drink the coffee someone had brought me. How long before we can find him? We're close, Margaret said, but I could see the strain in her expression. The problem is that Victoria is covering their tracks better than we expected. She's using resources we didn't know the family had access to. What kind of resources? The second security man looked uncomfortable. Professional resources. Ms. Carter, the people who took your son aren't just desperate family members. They're working with individuals who specialize in pressure situations. The words hit me like a physical blow. Professional kidnappers. The kind of people who knew how to disappear children forever if things went wrong. My phone rang. Victoria again. Have you made your decision, Olivia? I want to talk to my son. I'm afraid that's not possible right now. Ben is resting. Resting or unconscious? My voice cracked on the words. Careful, dear. Your imagination is running away with you. But there was something in Victoria's tone that made my blood run cold. I'm calling to make our final offer. Walk away from my father, sign a document stating that you renounce any claim to involvement in his care or his estate, and Ben comes home tonight. And if I don't? Then we'll be forced to consider more permanent solutions to our problem. I looked at Margaret, who was frantically scribbling something on a notepad. Keep her talking. We're tracing the call. Victoria, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, Ben is 9 years old. He's innocent in all this. Whatever you want from me, he doesn't deserve to suffer for it. You're absolutely right, Victoria said, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. He doesn't deserve to suffer. Which is why you're going to make the smart choice and end this before things get messy. Before things get messy? I repeated. You kidnapped a child. How much messier can it get? Victoria laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Oh, Olivia. You have no idea what messy looks like. The line went dead. I looked at the security men. Did you get anything? They're using burner phones and signal scramblers, one of them said grimly. Professional-grade equipment. This isn't amateur hour. My legs gave out and I sank into a chair. They're going to kill him. No, Margaret said firmly. They're not. Because Henry won't let that happen. Where is Henry? I asked. Shouldn't he be here? His grandchildren just kidnapped a child to get to him. Margaret exchanged a look with the security men. Olivia, there's something we haven't told you. Henry's not just in danger from his children. His condition, his medical condition, is more serious than he let on. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? The brain injury from his fall 2 years ago left him with more than temporary paralysis. He has episodes, seizures, confusion, periods where he loses consciousness. They've been getting more frequent. How frequent? He had one this morning. Right after you left the mansion. I felt like the room was spinning. Is he okay? He's stable, but he's in the hospital. Under sedation. Which means that right now, when we need him most, when we need his authority to mobilize resources to find Ben. Margaret's voice trailed off. He's not available, I finished. And his children know it. Victoria has been monitoring his medical condition through sources at the hospital. She chose today to take Ben because she knew Henry wouldn't be able to intervene. The full scope of what I was facing hit me like a tidal wave. These people hadn't just kidnapped my son on impulse. They'd planned this. They'd waited for Henry to be incapacitated, they'd used professional criminals, they'd covered their tracks with military-grade technology. And I was just a single mom who cleaned houses for a living. I can't do this, I whispered. I can't fight these people. They have everything, money, power, resources I can't even comprehend. And they have Ben. Olivia. No, I stood up, my whole body shaking. This was insane from the beginning. I should never have gotten involved. I should have just walked away when Henry told me who he was. But you didn't walk away, Margaret said quietly. And you know why? Because you're not the kind of person who abandons someone who needs help. That's exactly why Henry chose you. Henry chose wrong. The words burst out of me, raw and desperate. I can't save him and I can't save my son and I can't even save myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. From an unknown number. The message was a photo. Ben, sitting in what looked like a windowless room, his eyes red from crying, holding up a newspaper with today's date. He looked so small, so scared, so utterly alone. Below the photo was a message, 6 p.m. deadline. No police. No Henry. Just you, the signed document, and a one-way ticket out of town. Or Ben disappears forever. I showed the phone to Margaret, and I watched her face go pale. They want me to leave town, I said. Even if I sign the document renouncing any claim to help Henry, they want me gone. Permanently. Because you know too much now, one of the security men said grimly. About the embezzlement, the attempted murder, the kidnapping. You're a witness they can't afford to have walking around. So if I do what they want, Ben comes home but I disappear forever. And if I don't do what they want? Ben disappears forever, Margaret finished. I looked at the monitors, at the maps covered in red pins showing where Ben might be, at the phones that weren't ringing with good news. I thought about Henry lying unconscious in a hospital bed, about my son crying in a windowless room, about Victoria Walker sitting somewhere counting down the minutes until 6 p.m. It was 4:30. 90 minutes to choose between my son's life and my own. 90 minutes to accept that sometimes the monsters win. I walked to the window and looked out at the city where Ben was hidden somewhere, terrified and alone, while his mother tried to figure out how to save him from people who had more power than she could fight. There has to be another way, Margaret said behind me. No, I said quietly. There really doesn't. Because the truth was, I'd been fooling myself from the beginning. People like me didn't fight people like the Walkers and win. We survived by staying invisible, by keeping our heads down, by accepting that the world belonged to people with money and power and we just lived in the spaces they allowed us. I'd forgotten my place, and now my son was paying the price. At 5 p.m., I called Victoria back. I'll sign your document, I said. But I want to see Ben first. That's not how this works. Then we don't have a deal. There was a long pause. Fine. But you come alone. And Olivia? Victoria's voice was soft, almost gentle. I hope you understand that this is business. Nothing personal. You kidnapped my child, I said. It's personal. But even as I said the words, I knew I'd already lost. Some fights weren't worth having. Some fights couldn't be won. And some fights cost more than you could afford to lose. The address Victoria gave me was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Of course it was. As I drove through the industrial district in my beat-up Honda, past empty lots and rusted chain-link fences, I kept thinking about Ben's face in that photo. The way his eyes had looked so much older than 9 years old, like he'd suddenly realized that the world wasn't the safe place his mother had tried to make him believe it was. I'd failed him. In trying to help Henry, I'd put my son in danger, and now I was going to sign away any chance of justice just to get him back alive. My phone rang. Margaret. Olivia, don't do this. We're close to finding him. Give us more time. They said no police, no backup, no tricks, I said, pulling into the warehouse parking lot. I'm not risking Ben's life on clothes. Henry's awake. He's been asking for you. I closed my eyes. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him yourself. After you bring Ben home safely. I ended the call and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the warehouse. It was exactly the kind of place where bad things happen to people like me. Isolated, windowless, probably soundproof. But Ben was in there. I got out of the car. The warehouse door was unlocked, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. I pushed it open and stepped into a space that was much larger than it had looked from outside, high ceilings, concrete floors, shadows everywhere. Olivia. Victoria's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Right on time. Lights flickered on, revealing a setup that looked like something from a movie. Victoria stood in the center of the space, perfectly groomed as always, flanked by James and Richard. Behind them was a table with documents spread out, and next to that, Ben. My son was sitting in a chair, unharmed but clearly terrified. When he saw me, his face crumpled with relief. Mom. I started toward him, but James held up a hand. Not yet. Business first. Let me hold him while I sign your papers, I said. He's scared. He should be scared, Richard said with that cold smile. Fear is a powerful motivator. Victoria gestured to the documents on the table. It's very simple, Olivia. 3 signatures. 1 renouncing any involvement in our father's medical care. 1 stating that you were never promised anything by Henry Walker and have no claim to his estate. And 1 agreeing to relocate to another state with a generous severance package. I looked at the papers, then at Ben, then back at Victoria. How generous. $50,000. Enough to start over somewhere far from here. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to get Ben into a good school, to rent a decent apartment, to stop living paycheck to paycheck. All I had to do was sign away any chance of helping Henry and disappear forever. What happens to your father? I asked. Our father gets the professional care he needs, James said smoothly. In a facility that specializes in his condition. You mean you have him declared incompetent and locked away while you steal his money? Victoria's smile never wavered. We prefer to think of it as family management. I picked up the pen, and Ben's eyes widened with something that looked like disappointment. Like even at 9 years old, he'd expected better from his mother. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere near where Ben was sitting. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. In Morse code. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart started racing. Someone else was in this warehouse. Someone who was trying to help. You know what's interesting about this whole situation? I said, stalling for time while I tried to figure out where the sound was coming from. Your father spent 8 months testing me, making sure I was trustworthy. But in all that time, did he ever test you? What do you mean? Victoria's tone was sharp. I mean, maybe while he was disguised as a helpless old man, he was also watching what his own children did when they thought he wasn't paying attention. The tapping sound came again. Definitely SOS. And it was coming from behind a stack of crates near the back wall. Our father was barely conscious after his accident, Richard said dismissively. He wasn't watching anything. Are you sure about that? I set the pen down. Because Henry Walker didn't build a billion-dollar empire by being careless about who he trusted. Sign the papers, Olivia, James said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. Or what? You'll hurt Ben? In front of witnesses? What witnesses? Victoria laughed. That's when the lights went out. In the pitch-black darkness, I heard Ben shout, "Mom," and the sound of running feet. Someone grabbed my arm, gentle hands, familiar cologne. This way, Henry's voice whispered in my ear. Henry. Awake, mobile, and apparently much more capable than anyone had realized. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the warehouse in red. In the dim glow, I could see chaos security personnel in dark clothing surrounding Victoria and her brothers, Ben running toward me with tears streaming down his face. I caught my son in my arms and held him so tight I was afraid I might hurt him. Are you okay, baby? Are you hurt? I'm okay, he whispered against my neck. Mr. Henry said you'd come for me. He said you were the bravest person he knew. I looked over Ben's head to see Henry standing near the back of the warehouse, leaning heavily on a walking cane but very much alert and in control. Margaret was beside him, along with at least 6 men who looked like they could handle themselves in any situation. Surprise, Henry said to his children, who were now surrounded and looking considerably less confident than they had 5 minutes ago. Father, Victoria said, her voice shaky for the first time since I'd met her. We can explain. I'm sure you can, Henry said calmly. You've always been excellent at explanations. James, would you like to explain the $47 million missing from the charitable foundation accounts? Richard, perhaps you could explain why you've been paying yourself consulting fees from companies that don't exist? Victoria, I'm particularly interested in your explanation of why you thought kidnapping a 9-year-old boy was an appropriate business strategy. You have no proof, James started. Actually, I have extensive proof. Margaret, would you show them? Margaret opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Bank records, email communications, audio recordings, security footage. 2 years' worth of evidence, all legally obtained, all admissible in court. But more importantly, Henry continued, walking slowly toward his children, I have something else. He pulled out his phone and held it up. On the screen was a video, Victoria, James, and Richard in what looked like the mansion's library, discussing their plans. Everything you've done and said in the past week has been recorded, Henry said quietly. Including your confession to pushing me down those stairs, Victoria. Including your threats against Olivia and Ben. Including your detailed plans to have me declared incompetent and committed against my will. Victoria's face had gone ashen. That's impossible. We swept that room for bugs. You swept for traditional surveillance equipment, Margaret said with a smile. You didn't think to check the antique vase your father's been carrying his phone in during family meetings. The warehouse was completely silent except for the sound of Ben's breathing against my neck and the distant wail of police sirens. Olivia, Henry said, turning to me. I owe you an apology. I never intended for you or Ben to be put in danger. This, he gestured to his children, was never supposed to involve you directly. Then what was I supposed to be? Just a character witness? You were supposed to be my reminder, Henry said softly. My proof that there were still good people in the world. People who helped others without expecting anything in return. People who chose kindness even when it cost them. Police officers were streaming into the warehouse now, followed by paramedics and what looked like federal agents. The complexity of this operation was becoming clear. This wasn't just a family dispute or even a kidnapping case. This was a massive financial crimes investigation that had been building for months. How long have you been planning this? I asked Henry. Since the day you first helped me up that hill, he said. That's when I knew I'd found someone worth fighting for. Someone worth fighting with. Ben pulled back to look at me, his eyes still wide but no longer frightened. Mom, are the bad people going to jail? I looked at Victoria, James, and Richard being read their rights, their expensive clothes and perfect hair looking ridiculous as handcuffs were placed around their wrists. Yeah, baby, I said. The bad people are going to jail. And for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. Even when they're just single moms who help strangers for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the police station with Ben curled up asleep in my lap, watching through a one-way window as Victoria Walker was interviewed by federal agents. She wasn't the polished, confident woman who had threatened my son that morning. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her perfect hair was disheveled, and her hands shook every time she reached for the water glass on the table. She's going to prison for a very long time, Margaret said, settling into the chair beside me. The kidnapping charges alone carry a federal sentence of 25 to life. Add in the financial crimes, the attempted murder of Henry, the conspiracy charges, she'll be lucky to see daylight again before she's 80. What about James and Richard? James is cooperating. He's hoping his testimony against Victoria might get him a reduced sentence, maybe 15 to 20 years instead of life. Richard. Margaret shook her head. Richard is refusing to talk to anyone except his attorney. He seems to think his money and connections will protect him. Will they? Not this time. Henry made sure of that. Through the window, I watched Victoria lean forward and say something urgent to the agent interviewing her. Her attorney, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, kept trying to get her to stop talking, but she seemed desperate to make some kind of deal. What's she saying? I asked. Margaret checked her phone, where she'd been receiving updates from the lead investigator. She's claiming that everything was James's idea. That she was just following his lead, that she never wanted to hurt anyone. Is that true? According to the audio recordings Henry collected, Victoria was the one who suggested that Henry's accident should be permanent. She was the one who brought up the idea of using professional criminals to kidnap Ben. James may have been the financial mastermind, but Victoria. Margaret's expression darkened. Victoria is the one who would have killed you both if this had gone differently. I held Ben a little tighter. He stirred in his sleep and mumbled something about wanting to go home. How did Henry know? I asked. How did he know exactly when and where they would take Ben? He didn't, Margaret said. That was the terrifying part. Henry's been having his security team monitor the family's communications for months, but Victoria was careful. Too careful. We knew they were planning something, but we didn't know what or when. Then how? Ben saved himself. I looked down at my sleeping son. What do you mean? When the man picked him up from school, Ben was smart enough to be scared. He asked to call you, and when the man said no, Ben started paying attention to details. He memorized part of the license plate, he noticed which direction they were driving, and when they stopped at a gas station, he managed to activate the GPS tracking on his phone and send the location to your number. My heart swelled with pride and terror. He's 9 years old. He's your son, Margaret said simply. You've been teaching him to be smart, to be brave, to pay attention to danger. That saved his life today. The door opened and Henry walked in, moving slowly but under his own power. He looked exhausted but alert, and his eyes went immediately to Ben. How is he? Scared but okay, I said softly. He keeps asking if the bad people are really going to jail. Henry smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy expression I'd ever seen on his face. Tell him yes. The bad people are going to jail for a very, very long time. Henry, I said, I need to understand something. This whole elaborate plan, the months of surveillance, the legal preparation, how long have you been planning to take down your own children? Henry settled into a chair across from us, wincing slightly as he moved. Honestly? I've been suspicious for years. Victoria, James, and Richard haven't visited me out of love or concern since they were teenagers. Every interaction has been about money, about inheritance, about what they could get from me. But you still left them everything in your will. I did. Because I hoped I was wrong about them. I hoped that if they had something to lose, they might choose to be better people. He shook his head sadly. The night Victoria pushed me down those stairs, I realized that hope was misplaced. So you started gathering evidence. I started gathering evidence. But more than that, I started looking for someone I could trust to help me when the time came. Someone who couldn't be bought, manipulated, or intimidated. I thought about all those mornings, all those conversations. You were testing me. I was getting to know you. There's a difference. Henry's expression was gentle but serious. Olivia, in 8 months of watching you, my investigators found exactly one thing you did that was questionable. What? You lied on your tax return 3 years ago. You claimed a charitable deduction for donating clothes to Goodwill, but you overestimated the value by about $15. I felt my face heat up. In 8 months of surveillance, that was the worst thing they could find. $15. Meanwhile, my own children have stolen $47 million from charitable foundations, embezzled another $60 million from the estate, and plotted to murder their own father. He leaned forward. Do you understand why I chose you? Before I could answer, Ben stirred awake in my arms. He looked around the police station with wide eyes, taking in the uniforms and the official atmosphere. Are we in trouble? He whispered. No, baby, I said, smoothing his hair. We're the good guys, remember? Like superheroes? Henry laughed, a real laugh, not the careful chuckle I'd heard during our morning conversations. Exactly like superheroes, Ben. Your mother saved me, and I helped save you, and together we saved a lot of other people from some very bad criminals. Ben's eyes widened as he looked at Henry. You're not really hurt, are you? I am hurt, Henry said honestly. My brain doesn't work quite the way it used to, and sometimes I need help walking or remembering things. But I'm much stronger than I let people believe. Why did you pretend to be weaker? Because sometimes, Ben, the best way to catch bad people is to let them think you can't stop them. My children thought I was helpless, so they got careless about hiding their crimes. Margaret's phone buzzed with another update. She read it and smiled. James just confessed to everything. He's hoping to avoid the death penalty by providing evidence about the criminal organization they hired to kidnap Ben. Death penalty? I felt my blood run cold. Federal kidnapping charges where the victim is a minor, Henry explained quietly. It's one of the few crimes that still carries capital punishment. James is looking at execution if he doesn't cooperate. Ben looked between us with the intense focus of a child trying to understand adult conversations. Does that mean they tried to kill me? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. I didn't know how to answer it, how to explain to a 9-year-old that yes, the people who had taken him would have killed him if things had gone differently. It means they made very bad choices, Henry said gently. And now they have to live with the consequences of those choices for the rest of their lives. Good, Ben said with the simple moral clarity that only children possess. Bad people should go to jail. Margaret stood up. Olivia, we need to talk about what happens next. With Victoria, James, and Richard facing federal charges, there are going to be months of trials, depositions, media attention. You and Ben are key witnesses. What does that mean for us? It means protection, relocation assistance if you want it, and... Margaret exchanged a look with Henry. It means some significant changes to your financial situation. I frowned. I don't understand. Henry cleared his throat. Olivia, as the person who helped expose the largest case of charitable fraud in state history, you're entitled to a whistleblower reward. The federal government pays a percentage of recovered funds to citizens who help uncover financial crimes. How much of a percentage? In this case? Approximately $12 million. I stared at him. I'm sorry, what? $12 million, Henry repeated gently. Plus the estate is offering an additional reward for your assistance in preventing my murder and exposing the conspiracy against me. Ben perked up. Does that mean we can get a bigger apartment? I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. $12 million was more money than I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. It was enough to buy Ben any future he wanted, to send him to the best schools, to never worry about rent or bills or whether we could afford groceries again. I don't want a reward for helping you, I finally managed to say. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. I know, Henry said. That's exactly why you deserve it. Through the window, I watched as Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her head down, her perfect life demolished by her own choices. Her brothers would follow soon, and the empire they'd tried to steal would go to the people and organizations it was always meant to help. Justice, real justice, was happening. And somehow, impossibly, the single mom who cleaned houses and the disguised billionaire who needed help up a hill had won. The waitress, a young woman who looked about my age, approached our table hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, "I know this might sound weird, but are you Olivia Carter? The woman who started that foundation for seniors?" "Yes," I said, still not quite used to being recognized. "I just wanted to thank you. My grandmother was being scammed by some financial advisors who were stealing her social security checks. Your foundation helped her get her money back and press charges. She's safe now because of what you do." After she walked away, Ben looked at me with an expression of pure pride. "See, Mom? You are changing the world." And sitting there in that diner, with my son beside me and my friend across from me, surrounded by the ordinary magic of people choosing to help each other, I realized that Ben was right. I was changing the world. One act of kindness at a time. Just like Henry had changed mine that first morning when he'd given me the chance to be the person I wanted to be. I hope this story has inspired you to look for the people in your own life who might need help, who might be invisible to everyone else. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest choice to care about a stranger. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when kindness, given or received, changed your day, your perspective, or your life. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe because I love sharing stories that remind us that the best of humanity is found in the smallest, most courageous acts of love. After all, you never know when helping someone up a hill might end up changing everything.